some background over here. We have to go back a little bit to understand. Last week I said to you that Yosef lost 10 years of his life. And we have to understand a few things. Number one, we're going to find out next week that the Shvatim lived very long. That means the average person lived 40 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. The Shvatim all lived to be over 100 years old, which is very unusual. We're going to talk about that next week. The youngest was Yosef. Yosef died at the age of 110. He should have lived to be 120. He died 10 years short. The Gemara talks about why he got involved with Rabbanut, with the rabbis. So since he had leadership, it took some years off his time. Another opinion was that he heard 5 times or 10 times, "My father, your servant," But there was a third opinion that was very interesting. The third opinion says that when Yaakov was coming down to Egypt, Yosef went to greet him. Yosef came with a whole entourage, chariots, horses, wagons, soldiers. Yaakov thought, who was that coming? Paro. So what did Yaakov do? He bowed. And Yosef should not have let his father bow to him.
Disrespect.
That was disrespect. And we know that you live long if you respect your father. If you don't, you live shorter. So they asked, what should he have done? He should have anticipated his father's mistake. He should have sent a horse ahead and say, "Are you Yaakov? Yes. Your son is coming. I just want you to know, don't get confused. That's not Paro. That's your son." At least he should have warned him.
Yeah.
So someone asked me the question, a very good question. He says, hold on. Yosef was following the dreams. In the second dream, the sun and the moon bowed to him.
Yes.
Who was the sun?
Father.
So the dream says he bowed.
Yeah.
So why is Yosef being punished? The dream, which was a nevuah from Hashem, had the sun bowing to Yosef. So Yaakov was supposed to bow. What's the problem? The answer is a very important answer. It's true Yaakov may have been supposed to bow to Yosef, but whose choice should it have been? Yaakov's. Right? Yosef should have told his father, "I'm coming, you don't have to bow." If Yaakov decides to bow because that's what the dream says, that's okay, but that's Yaakov's decision. When you take the decision away from your father by tricking your father, that's on you. Okay. The next thing we need to understand, very important, listen to this very carefully. Last week we spoke about this. Last week we said, what was Yosef thinking? We're trying to put ourselves in the brain of Yosef. We said that Yosef said to the brothers, "We are just pawns on a chessboard." Remember I gave you the example. A man takes a stick and hits the dog.
Yeah.
The dog gets angry and bites the stick. What do we say? Stupid dog.
Yeah.
The stick didn't hit you. Who hit you? The man. The stick was just the weapon, the tool.
Yeah.
Yosef said to the brothers, "You think you sold me? You didn't sell me. You didn't hurt me. You did nothing. You were just little pieces on the chessboard.
Messenger.
You were messengers of Hashem." And he was so sincere, he turned over the whole world. All the Egyptians had Brit Milah, so they shouldn't feel outcast. And all the Egyptians were moved around, so everybody was a stranger. We gave an example of this, David HaMelech. He was running away from Avshalom, and his Rebbe, a good friend of his, Shimi ben Gera, was on the mountain. And what was Shimi ben Gera doing? Throwing rocks at David HaMelech. And he was cursing him. What did he say to him? "Get out of here! You're a murderer, you're an adulterer. Klolo Nimretzes, you're a Moavi, you're not even Jewish, you're disgusting." Avishai said, "Why do you have to sit here and listen to that? Let me go take my sword, and I'm going to take his head off his shoulders." Simple. Solve the problem. David says, what's it to your business? You think he's up there because he wants to be up there? Hashem sent him there. He's there for a reason. My job is to figure out the reason. He's just a stick. You're going to take a sword and beat up a stick. That's ridiculous. Don't be silly. That's what we said last week. The problem is the Haftarah of this week, Parshat Vayechi. The Haftarah is the second parak of Malachim Aleph. You know what happens in the Haftarah?
Yes. He tell the four, kill them.
Kill them. David
them.
HaMelech
For
calls his son Shlomo in. He says, I have
Before
unfinished
he
business
died.
for you. He says, there's a guy, Yoav ben Tzeruya. Yoav was his general, David, and also one of David HaMelech's good friends. And he says, you know what Yoav did? He killed two people. He killed Avner ben Ner, and he killed Amosa ben Yeser. Now, these were generals on Shaul HaMelech's side, or on David HaMelech's side for one. And it says he killed them, the Mei Milchama, like fighting, B'Shalom, at a time of peace. And therefore, do me a favor, he says. Yoav cannot die old age in his bed. Make sure his death is violent. Then he says, remember that guy Shimi ben Gera, my Rebbe, my good friend? As we were leaving, he cursed me a horrible curse. You're a goy, you're a murderer. Do me a favor. Make sure he also dies a violent death. Okay. Last week we said that David HaMelech said, it's been Hashem, they're sticks, leave him alone. Why are you beating up a stick? This week, he's like a mafia guy, calling his son and saying, let's get rid of these guys, unfinished business. It's like I told you that Yehuda said to Yosef, you're like Paro, I respect you. You're like a king, you deserve respect. But we disagree, and if you don't change your mind, I'm going to kill you. But I like you. You're a really good guy. I respect you. You're a king. It's just that you took my brother, and I'm not happy that you took my brother, and I want to take my brother back home to his dad. So I love you, but I'm going to have to kill you. It's not personal. It's just business. So, it doesn't make sense. Last week, he's the stick, and now he's trying to kill the stick. So I saw a fascinating answer, that you need to listen to this answer. David HaMelech said to Shlomo, he said, listen, Shlomo, Yoav and Shimi ben Gera are good friends of mine. They really are. Yoav was a loyal soldier, and Shimi was a Rebbe of his. These two guys did terrible things. Now, in a little while, I'm going to die. What's going to happen to me when I die? I'm going to go up to Shamayim, and I'm going to have to give a din v'cheshbon. I'm going to have to give an accounting. I think I'm okay, and I think I'm going to get Olam Haba. You know what I would like to see when I get to Olam Haba? I'd like to see my two friends there with me. But if they die a regular peaceful death, and they have to come up and answer for what they did, what's going to happen to my good friends?
They go to
They're going to go the
the
left door. They're not going to go to the synagogue. They're going to end up in the church. They're going to be at the wrong entrance, man. They're going to be in trouble. So therefore, if I really am a friend, I'm asking you to do me a favor. Make their death a tikkun for their avedot. And the only way that can happen is if the death is violent. So David was not trying to take revenge. He was not trying to be God. He wanted to help his best friends. He wanted their death to be a kapara for the horrible mistakes they made. And as the melech, he had the power. So this wasn't an act of vengeance. It was an act of love, an act of kindness. That's what he said to Shlomo. I can't do it, because if I do it, it's an act of vengeance. But I'm asking you, do me a favor. When I am in Olam Haba, I want to be together with my good friends. And it won't happen unless you do something about it. Now that's a fascinating
But
answer.
because of that, the Rebbe said last week his life went shorter.
Shlomo HaMelech's life went shorter. He lived to only be 52, and he lost his Rebbe, and therefore he got involved with Baal Paro. Yeah.
Because of the Rebbe,
Yeah. Well, because Shimi ben Gera was his Rebbe.
yeah.
Wow.
Like his father.
Sure. You should always be nice to the Rebbe. It's like a father. You're going to live long. You notice every week I stick that in. Get your mortgages by me and be nice. That's all it is. That's all I'm telling you. That's what I'm telling you.
Rabbi, the point, if you're rabbi about father,
what kind of Shlomo Amelech pick up his hand to for his rabbi? Why?
So the
He's not
answer
equal.
is Shlomo HaMelech didn't do it himself. He sent Benayahu ben Yehoyada, who was his chief of staff, and he arranged for it to be done. You know, he didn't get his hands dirty himself. And we explained that Shimi ben Gera, living a little bit longer, had children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. One of his children, one of his great-grandchildren was Mordechai. Mordechai, right? Ben Yair, ben Shimi, ben Shaul, ben Kish. So by letting Shimi live a little bit longer, Mordechai was born. So there was a cheshbon, there was a reason for it. But it's fascinating to see. Next, I told you this once before. I want to tell it to you again because it's such a very interesting thing. In the beginning of Vayechi, Yaakov calls Yosef to his bedside because Yaakov was sick. Now, Yosef did not know his father was sick. And they all ask why he didn't know. How could he not know? This is his father. Didn't he speak to his father every day? And the answer was no. Even though he loved his father and he wanted to be very close to his father, he stayed away. Why? Because he was afraid. He was afraid that his father, over a cup of coffee, would one day ask Yosef, by the way, what happened 22 years ago? When you went, tell me what happened. And he didn't want to lie to his father. So he tried to avoid his father to avoid the question. He stayed away to avoid the question. Okay, so he says that Yaakov says, when I die, I want you to take me from Egypt and bury me where? In Israel, in the Marat HaMachpelah. Vayomer, Yosef says, Anochi esek hidvorecha, I'll do what you want. So Yaakov says, promise me.
Put in the break.
You know, and he promised him, and Yaakov bowed to the head of the bed. So I saw one of the Perushim ask, Yaakov did not make any of the other brothers promise. Only Yosef.
Because he was
Now, Yosef had the power to do this because he was the king. He had the power to do it. But he didn't make Reuven promise, or Shimon, or Levi. No one else had to promise. So I saw a very interesting answer. Yaakov had no doubt that Yosef and the brothers would take him back to Israel. There was no question about that.
what?
The question was, if Yosef took him back to Israel, where would Yosef bury his father? Think about that question.
Next to the mother.
Next to the mother, which is not in Hebron and not in the Marat HaMachpelah. It's in Beit Lechem.
Yeah, different.
Why? Because he belongs next to my mother. Because my mother was the real wife. And she gave up to Leah, but that was then, this is now. That means Yaakov knew that getting him back to Israel was never going to be a problem. Reuven would take him back, Yehuda would, Levi would, Shimon, no, there was no problem with that. But he knew of all the children, one child had the power to say, no.
I'm the boss.
Not Hebron, Beit Lechem, not next to Leah, Rachel. That was Yosef. So he calls Yosef in. He says, do me a favor. I know I didn't carry your mother there, and we're going to talk about why in a moment. Please bury me not only in Israel, but also in the Marat HaMachpelah. And Yosef said, okay. And he said, but promise me. And Yosef promised him. So that's very important. Now, they say that Yosef promised, and when he went to Paro, and he said to Paro, my father wants me to bury him in Israel, so Paro says, no, Yaakov is too holy, we want to keep him here. You remember, when he came, the famine stopped, all the brachos came.
17 years.
Right, the brachos came. So Yosef says, I can't, I promised. So Paro says, okay, well, go to the rabbis and do hatarat nedarim. Just, you can get out of it. And Yosef said, well, if I got out of that promise, I might get out of the promise I made to you. He promised Paro that I wouldn't tell anyone that you can't speak Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh, but Paro was embarrassed by that.
What promise?
Paro knew all the languages of the world, but he could never master Hebrew. Next week, we're going to find out a little bit more about Hebrew, the language, and about a lot of things. I mean, for example, next week I'm going to talk to you about why did the Jews end up in Egypt for hundreds of years? What was the reason? What was the purpose of Galut Mitzrayim? It's very interesting, the answers that they give, and we're going to go through it in great length. It's very interesting. But So, the Torah Tamima says, Yosef didn't say it exactly like that to Paro. That would be disrespectful. Yosef said to him a halacha. The Gemara brings it down. It's a Tosfos. If I make a promise to you, I promise you something. Can I go and do hatarat nidarim to get out of my promise to you? No. Hatarat nidarim only works between promises between man and Hashem. If I make a promise to you, there's only one person who can let me out of the promise. Who's that?
Hashem.
You.
You, yeah.
Otherwise, my word means nothing. So Yosef said to Paro, I made you a promise. How would you like it if I went to the rabbis and the rabbi says, mutalach, mutalach, mutalach? Paro says, that's crazy. They can't do it. It's my promise. Only I can let you out. He says, you're right. But I made a promise to my father. Who's the one person who can let me out? My father. Yeah. My father's dead. So I'm stuck. That's what he said to Paro. He said, I'm stuck.
Because second people not here.
He's not here. I can't, I'm stuck. What can I do? So he says, the rabbis can't help me. The rabbis can't help me. I have to respect my promise to you. I have to respect my promise to my father. Paro said, I hear that. I understand that. Now, there's a sefer called Yoznaim La Torah of Zalman Sorotskin. He says something, I once told you this, it's so fantastic, it's unbelievable. Yaakov said to Yosef, bury me in Israel. Yosef says, I'll do what you want. Yaakov bows to the head of the bed where the Shekhinah is. Rashi says something very fascinating. Rashi says, what did he say? He says that he bowed to the head of the bed. He says, Shahoyso mitoso shlemo. Yaakov says, my bed is complete. All my children are tzaddikim. Yosef is a king in Egypt. He grew up amongst goyim. And yet, I see he's a tzaddik. So Zalman Sorotskin says, hold on here. If a father says to his kid, do me a favor, go to the store and buy me a carton of milk. And the kid says to his dad, sure, Dad, no problem. I'll go out and buy you a carton of milk. Would you right away say, oh, my kid is a tzaddik. He's so wonderful. He's buying me a carton of milk. What's all that about? All Yosef said was, sure, Dad, I'll do what you want. That doesn't make Yaakov the happiest man in the world. Why is he so happy? So he says, we're not reading the pasuk right. Listen to what Rav Zalman Sorotskin says. Yaakov says to Yosef, I want you to carry me up to Israel after I die and bury me in Israel. So Yosef says, Vayomer, Yosef says to his father, Anochi, when I die, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to ask my children to bury me in Israel. Yaakov says, hold on here. You haven't been in Israel for 50 years. By the time you die, you will not have been in Israel for 80 years. You're a king. You grow up here. They're popular. They're going to name streets after you. They're going to name cities after you. They're going to name public schools after you. The Yosef High School. You're going to go ask to be buried in Israel? You left Israel when you were 17 years old. That's over almost 100 years ago. He says, Dad, if Israel is so important to you, it's important to me. When Yaakov heard that his son, who grew up in Chutz La'aretz, had such a love of Israel, even though he hadn't been there for 100 years, you know what he said? Now I know he's a tzaddik.
Wow.
Now he bowed to Hashem and said, thank you. That's a child. It's not because he's burying me. It's because he wants to be buried there. And it's true. He told his children to take me. And because it was so unbelievable for Yosef to want that, who actually took him to be buried in Israel? Moshe Rabbeinu. That means Hashem said, a guy like that, you know who's going to take him? Not anybody. The best. Because he deserves the best. Okay.
But what we can say about ourselves? Are we tzaddik because we're not?
So the answer is, we see from here the importance of being buried in Israel.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says about ourselves. I know that my wife wants to be buried in Israel. She's already made that clear to me. I didn't know we were talking about this yet, but she's talking about it. If you ask the Israeli government, they would say, we'd rather you come and live in Israel, not just be buried in Israel. That means give us some good years of your life first. So,
How Moshe buried him if he didn't go there?
so the answer was Moshe took him out of Mitzrayim. Moshe kept him near his tent. For the 40 years in the desert, which we're going to talk about tonight, Moshe watched over him. When Moshe was going to die, he handed him over to the next leader, Yehoshua.
Rabbi Shimon,
Which makes sense, because Yehoshua was from Shevet Ephraim. So
Yeshua
Yosef was his great-great-grandfather.
Ben-Nun.
Right? So he gave it to Yeshua.
Yeah.
So he handed him over from leader to leader. Yosef was always in the hands of the top. Unbelievable. There's something from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, very interesting. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says as follows. There were 7 miracles of the world. You know, we have in English something called the 7 wonders of the world. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
What is one of the pyramids is one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Niagara Falls.
Yeah, something like that. Now they have the 7 wonders of the modern world. They have new ones. The Eiffel Tower, I think, I don't know, maybe Niagara Falls. They're different ones. So he brings down the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer from the great Tana, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, the 7 wonders of the world. He says, wonder number 1. From the time the world started, there never was a person thrown into a furnace and survived till Avraham Avinu came. That was number 1.
Say again? I'm sorry.
That someone was thrown into a fiery furnace and survived.
Огонь его бросили же.
Avraham Avinu.
Abraham Avinu, yeah.
The second one was that a woman who was 90 years old gave birth.
Sarah
Sarah.
Avinu.
The third one was nobody ever got old until the days of Avraham. Avraham got old. The fourth one was no one ever got sick. A person would
Yaakov.
sneeze,
Yeah,
and the
he got-
neshama left through their nose, and that's why when a person sneezes, we say la briut or whatever, till Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu was the
The
first
first one.
person to get sick, and that was the end of that. Number 5, from the beginning of the world, no one ever split the ocean.
Yosef.
Moshe.
Moshe. Yeah.
And for number 6, from the beginning of the world, no one ever stopped the sun in the sky.
Yoshua.
Yehoshua
ben Nun.
stopped it on a Friday. That was the longest Erev Shabbos ever. The trunk burned, everything
There's
burned.
a Gemara also, there's a one Tana.
Yes,
He held some.
right.
For the Shabbos.
Money, he had money for the wells and everything else, yes.
Yoshua also
No,
held the
he held somebody for the Shabbos to take care of him,
He also held
to go to his house. And he felt so embarrassed that he's coming home, and Hashem made a miracle that
It stopped. But,
But this is the-
Yoshua was the first.
This is it was reflected to other nations.
Yeah, they saw it as well. And the 7th one was very interesting, number 7. No one ever had a gezerah in Shemayim that they're going to be sick, and therefore they were going to die and live, except for Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Remember, they said to him, it's gone, it's finished, there's nothing you can do, it's a gezerah. And Chizkiyahu says, no, I'm not worried about that. Okay. In the sefer that I bring every week, I didn't bring it this week because I photocopied it, the Otzer Pelos HaTorah,
Проклятие.
he says as follows. How are we doing? Oh, we're doing okay. He says, why didn't Yaakov bury Rachel in the Marat HaMachpelah?
Because of Galut.
Why didn't he? So Rashi says that she was needed to daven for her children. The problem with that is she could have davened from anywhere. She didn't have to be in Beit Lechem to daven, and from the Marat HaMachpelah she could have davened. Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov davened also. So the Gemara says, one answer the Gemara gives, there's a very painful answer. The Gemara says that when she wanted the flowers from Ruvain, the Dudaim, so she said to Leah, Leah said to her, it's not enough you take my husband, you want to take my flowers? So Rachel said to Leah, you know what? Tonight, Yaakov is yours.
Yeah.
So Hashem said, if you're so quick to give up your husband, then you'll not be buried with him either. That's what one of the Gemara says.
It means that you don't love her?
It means that you don't love him enough. It's a very interesting Gemara. So it means that Rachel was not buried next to Yaakov in the Marat HaMachpelah. It was part of a punishment. It was part of kapara for what she said. Yes, Agav, she was there to daven. That was great. But she ended up there by default. It wasn't the intention. The Chizkuni says something different. The Chizkuni said, this is brought down lahalacha. He says that Rachel died in childbirth. Normally when a person dies in childbirth, there's a lot of loss of blood. And from a halacha point of view, we have to bury the person in all the blood.
Yes.
So it's almost like a mace mitzvah. Where the person dies, that's where they buried her. They don't move her anywhere because it's just impossible. It's just too much loss of blood. So she gave birth in Beit Lechem. Where she gave birth, that's where she ended up being buried. That's what the Chizkuni says.
Binyamin,
Yeah. The Ramban says that for Yaakov to have taken her to Hebron, he would have to leave the kids behind because he had to travel quickly. And they were just too dangerous. The kids were very young still. Binyamin was just born. He was a newborn. Yaakov did not want to leave the family alone, unprotected. He needed to be there to protect it. So he says it just wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible. You know, I remember in Baltimore, near Yisrael, when the Mashgiach passed away, Reb David Kronglass, he wanted to be buried in Israel. Now this goes back to the 70s, the early 70s. In those days, when they took a body overseas to Israel, the rule was you had to embalm the body.
What?
Embalm. You had to take out the blood and put it from embalming. Mummified. We're not allowed to do that, la halacha. Right, we can't do that. So how did they take bodies to Israel? So it was a shtick, it was a trick. They used to pour formaldehyde, which is embalming fluid, in the coffin. And the guy at the airport got paid $3.50 an hour, wasn't going to open up the coffin and stick his hand into the dead body. He would smell.
Yeah.
He smelled the formaldehyde, the coffin went through. That week when he died, they discovered that the soldiers in Vietnam, when they were sending back the dead bodies, were smuggling drugs, cocaine, in the bodies. So all coffins were stopped, and all coffins were opened, and all coffins were inspected. So that week, no one could get buried in Israel. So he died that week. So they wanted to bury him in Israel, but they couldn't. They couldn't.
You have to bury him here.
They had to bury him here. So they buried him in Baltimore. So, you know, same thing with Yosef. Same thing with Yaakov. Yaakov would love to have buried Rachel in the Marat HaMachpelah. The Ramban says he couldn't. The children were young. He was afraid to leave him alone. It was a dangerous time. It was a dangerous country. He didn't want to leave him. The next answer the Ramban gives is also very, very interesting. Listen to what the Ramban says. The next answer, very interesting. The Ramban says that Yaakov was embarrassed to have Rachel buried in the Marat HaMachpelah with Leah. Because everybody, we all go to Hebron. When I go to Israel, I go to Hebron. And most of the time. This year I have to think about if I'm going to go to Hebron or not. But we go to Hebron. He says, how does it look? You go to the grave of Yaakov, and there is Rachel and there is Leah, two sisters. According to the Torah, you can't be buried to two sisters. Yaakov says, I don't want to rub it in the face of my children and grandchildren, that every time they go, they see me buried next to two sisters. So he said, Leah will be buried here, but Rachel not.
But according to Ben Ishai, I heard that they were not sisters.
Well,
When they got the Gerut through the
so
Avinu.
again, those are technicalities, but he didn't
That's
want
why
to.
he was permitted to marry.
Yeah, I know. I'm just telling you what the Ramban says. The Ramban says he didn't want that people should say, look, I married the two
Yeah,
sisters.
Machshavot
So
You didn't want it.
where is Yaakov buried next to Rachel?
Yaakov was buried next to Leah
Leah.
Why Joseph didn't do it?
because he made him promise him that he wouldn't.
Promises.
He made
asked
Yaakov
him
made
to
Yosef promise, bury me next to Leah,
Oh, not to
not
Rachel?
Rachel.
So Yosef
Rachel is by herself on the road. Beit Lechem by herself.
Yosef-
Not just the wife, the father.
I thought you said he asked him to bury next to Rachel.
No, I said, why did he make him promise and not the other children promise? Because he was afraid Yosef would bury him next to his mother.
Oh, that's why.
And he didn't want him to, so he made him promise he wouldn't. Okay? We have a custom to give brachot to our children. When do we give brachot to our children? Friday night.
Okay.
So the question is, how come we don't do it every day? Why Friday night? What's so special about Friday night that we give a bracha to our
Shabbat
children?
Kodesh.
Shabbat Kodesh.
What's so special? Some people give a bracha to their children before they get married. What's so special? Erev Yom Kippur, we give brachot also. So he brings down in the Sefer Otzar Pelos HaTorah, he says, very interesting. He says, in order to give a bracha, you have to be calm. During the week, we're just not calm. We're too busy running. We're jobs, work, shopping, cooking. He says, the only time we're really calm is Friday night. The other thing he says is very interesting. He says, during the week, our children have ways of aggravating us. He brings us down. We're always screaming at our children, get up, you're going to miss school, get up, you're going to miss your bus, put your dishes in the thing, put your laundry in the hamper, clean up your room, make your bed. He says, to give a bracha, when you're always screaming at your kids, you can't do it. He says, at least Friday night, most kids and parents are on a good basis. It's Shabbos, they're relaxing, they're singing, their beds are made, there's no homework to be done, they can't ride anyway, there's no buses to catch. So he says Friday night seems to be the better time to give a bracha where you feel like giving the bracha and they're in a better position to accept the bracha. The Bnei Yissaschar, he says there were 12 tribes. Every tribe is represented by a different month of the year. There's 12 months. Every tribe is matched up with a different month. I'll give you an example. He says Adar. Adar, who's the tribe for Adar? Yosef. Why? He says Adar, the mazal is Pisces, fish. And Yosef is compared to fish. Fish have no ayin hara. Yosef is compared to fish. He says that Adar is the month that if there's a leap year, you have two Adars. Well, it makes sense, Ephraim and Menashe.
Adar Vadar.
Right, Ephraim and Menashe. He says Adar comes before Nisan, and in Nisan came the Geula, and eventually the next Geula will come in Nisan. Well, that makes sense. Adar comes first, Mashiach ben Yosef, before Mashiach ben David. So he says that Adar makes a lot of sense that Adar represents Yosef. He says Esther grew up in the palace of the king. Yosef grew up in the palace of the king. Similarities. Moshe was born in Adar. Moshe also grew up in the palace of the king. He says Adar is the month for the people who grow up in the palace of Goyish kings. You know, you see that. He has a whole thing over there, and he goes through every month. And I didn't go through it for you here, but every month, you look at every month, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, he tells you which Shevet. He connects the Shevet to the month. It's very fascinating. Every month, one tribe. So it came out to be very interesting. I once told this to you, and I wanted to tell it to you again. You look at the brachot that Yaakov gave. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Yaakov really gave brachot identifying each person to know what they can do and what they can accomplish. You know, the biggest bracha you can give a person is help identify their character. And I'll give you an example. It's silly for a rabbi to go to a person and say, I give you a bracha, you'll play piano like Mozart. Especially if the kid can't play piano, right?
Yeah.
That's not a bracha. That's just wishful thinking. You know, that's not a bracha. You know, a bracha means you have certain skills, and I want to give you a bracha that those skills should come out.
Yeah.
It's trying to help you identify. You know, it's important for you to know what your skills are. And when you know what your skills are, you're better in a position to have a bracha. So I mentioned to you that the bracha that the Torah says, how do we bless our children? Hashem should make you like Ephraim and Menashe. Right? That's the bracha.
Yeah.
Right? Hashem should make you like Ephraim and Menashe. To girls, what's the bracha we give girls? Hashem should make you like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Which begs the question that if we were going to give a bracha to the boys, we should say Hashem should make you like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov.
Yeah.
Right? That should be. That's not the bracha. We don't give
Father
that.
for mother.
We should do that. We don't do that. I'm going to give you an answer in a moment. So if you ask the question why,
Yes.
the short answer is because the Torah says so. The Torah says so. They start giving answers. Well, Ephraim and Menashe grew up in Chutz La'aretz, and they remained religious, so that's good. Menashe was older. Ephraim wasn't jealous. Jealous is a terrible thing. That's it. Personally, I think everybody should tell their children you should be like Ephraim. You know, to me, that makes sense, right? You understand that, right? Okay. You understand that, bracha? Good, I was just
No,
checking.
no. But as again,
He doesn't get it, but
No.
you get it.
He was
doesn't
already
get
fried.
why? Because all word tell the for nobody about the Ephraim and Manasseh. And why you give me answer now? All word just thinking about the for Ephraim and Manasseh. Nobody in the world did that. What them they love each other, help each other, and take care
But
of
you
each
don't know
other.
why I said you should have the bracha to be like Ephraim, do you?
Why?
So she was already fried.
Yeah, because your name is
Ah,
Ephraim.
there you go. Okay.
But
I
don't
was just
forget.
checking to see if you got that.
But
Okay.
don't forget, my name is Israel. 3 mother, 4 father.
That is correct. But I'm going to show you something different. There was a Rosh Hashiva in Baltimore, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, and he gave a very modern answer. Listen to this answer. I once told this to you, but you should listen to the answer very carefully. Avraham marries Sarah,
Yes,
has Yitzchak.
yes.
So if you were a scientist, Yitzchak has the DNA of Avraham and Sarah, right?
Yes,
You got that. Yitzchak marries Rivka,
yes.
has Yaakov.
And
Yaakov has the DNA of Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka. Yaakov marries Rachel, has Yosef. So Yosef has the DNA of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel.
Rachel,
Who's he missing?
Leo.
Leo.
Yosef marries Osnat, who's the daughter of Dinah, who's the daughter of Leah. He has Ephraim and Manasseh.
Connection with the wife.
Ephraim and Manasseh are the
The
only
Elka.
children
Then,
that have the DNA of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah.
Leah
Yisrael.
from Israel.
They're the only children. So he says, if I would give the bracha, you should be like Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. I'm taking away
Leah.
Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Yosef. I'm taking away so many positive things. He says, I would give the bracha, you should be like Ephraim and Manasseh to boys and to girls. Because Ephraim and Manasseh, the bracha means you should have all the
together.
power of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. And Yosef put in, and Osnat, you know.
The Elka.
Whoa!
Yes.
They're the only children, Ephraim and Manasseh are the only children that have everything.
Wow.
Yeah,
Now you give me correctly answer.
Now-
Thank you.
Now, that's a bracha, right? You give that bracha, whoa, that's a bracha. Okay,
Every Ephraim and Manasseh have this.
there you go. Okay, now we're going to see how much you know. You go to school? Yes. You learned Chumash a little bit?
Yeah.
Yes. You know your Chumash?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to give you a test, okay? I'm going to ask you one question.
I had a test.
You had a test. I ask you one question. You get it right, you get 100. You get it wrong, you get a 0.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to make it an easy question. Okay? I don't like to pick on. Yes, I do. That's not true. I like. And if he doesn't know, sorry, you answer the question. How many years of hunger, famine, was there supposed to be in Mitzrayim? Simple question.
How many people?
How many years? There was 7 good years.
You must.
How many years of famine was there supposed to be?
There's no boy.
7. What would you say, Sarah? 7. Right? Everybody says 7.
40.
42.
42, yeah. 42, yeah. 6, 7,
What?
42. Midrash say, yeah.
No. The Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, he writes as follows. He says the Gezerah of fast, of famine in Mitzrayim was 42 years.
Midrash say.
He says, why 42 years?
7 to 7.
He says
76.
7 and 7. He said 7 cows and 7 corn. He had the dream. That's 14. He told over the dream was another 14, is 28. Yosef interpreted the dream was another 14, is 42. So he brings down from the Das Akeni Mibale HaTosfos. Yosef said to Paro as follows. He says, listen, Paro, I got bad news for you. 7 good years, but the bad years are going to be 42. But I'm going to say only 7 bad years because the dream goes after the interpretation. It's like a tefillah. I'm going to ask Hashem to only make 7 bad years. I don't know if he's going to listen to me, but that's what I'm going to do. In the end, there were 2 years of bad years, and then it stopped. Who came down?
Yaakov.
Yaakov.
Yeah.
So he brings down, very interesting, he says when Yaakov died, the Egyptians cried for 40 days. One day for every year that there was no famine. There was supposed to be 42 years. There was only 2. 40 were gone. So if you look at the end of Vayechi, after 30 days of embalming, it says that the Egyptians cried for him
Another 10 days.
another 40 days.
Oh, another 40 days?
Perek Nun Pasuk Gimel. It says, Vayemalu lo arboim yom. And then it says they cried altogether 70. So it took 40 and 30. He says they literally cried 40 days for Yosef, for Yaakov.
Yaakov.
So then the Das that came in Balei Tosa says, in the days of Yirmiyahu, the 40 years came back. He says there's a pasuk in Yecheskel, V'hoya Eretz Yisrael lecharova. Mitzrayim will be desolate, will be dry, nothing will grow. Ushemoma, it will be barren.
40 years.
Why? Because they had the chutzpah to say, Yo'orli, the Nile, I made it, Paro says. Ani ositi. Paro said, I'm a god and I created the Nile. God said, really? Well, let's see how good that Nile will do. 40 years came back. So, it was supposed to be 42 years. 40 years were suspended. The Egyptians didn't behave. The 40 years came back. Listen to this. The Jews also suffered 2 years of famine. Comes down to Mitzrayim,
40
it's
years.
suspended. How did the Jews get rid of those extra 40 years?
In the Bamidbar.
In the desert. In the desert is a place where nothing grows.
Yes.
Hashem took care of them.
Yeah.
But Hashem says follows. The Egyptians cried 40 days. 1 day for every year. The Jews cried 40 days. 1 year for every day. So they spent 40 years in the desert. So they says that the 40 years in the desert, why 40 years in the desert? Was to wipe out those 40 years from the days of Yaakov Avinu.
Just like Tikkun.
Just like a tikkun, it was just like a perfect
Put them in
balance.
level.
Okay.
Something. Not level, what is
It is 5 minutes left. So I might as well end with something that will shock you. And I'll tell you this, and the only reason why I'm telling you this is because it's from the Chidah. So now I know when I tell you this, and you're going to say, I don't believe this is crazy, it doesn't make any sense. But I know that if I tell you it's from the Chidah. Now, how do I know it's from the Chidah? The answer is because my sefer that Otzer Plus HaTorah quotes it from the Chidah, I photocopied it, but I still couldn't believe it. So I went to a shul that has a 5-volume set, Chidushei HaChidah al HaTorah. And I looked it up to see if it was in there. And guess what? It was. So then I tried to buy the set. Couldn't find it anywhere. I went to Gift World, they didn't have it. I went to suppliers, they didn't have it. I went to Safra, they didn't have it. I looked online by Eichler and a bunch of Brooklyn stores, they didn't have it. I found one place that had the 5-volume set. Chidushei Torah Shel HaChidah al HaTorah. 5 volumes. It was not cheap, but I ordered it. That's the beauty of a credit card. And now we'll see what it comes in. So I picked up 2 sets of Sforim, the Al-Shich, because I'm going to say a bunch of things from the Al-Shich next week and the week and next year. So I picked up the Al-Shich HaKodesh, powerful stuff, the Al-Shich HaKodesh, and I picked up the Sefer on the Chidah. So we'll see how we can really blow your minds away. Okay, what does the Chidah say that is so bizarre? On the bracha to Binyamin, it says, Binyamin ze'ev yitraf. Binyamin is like a wolf that tears things apart. So the Chidah writes that he heard in the name of Rabbeinu Ephraim, caught my eye. He says, something amazing, he says. Binyamin had a sickness that from time to time, like when there was a full moon or when he got angry, he would change into a wolf.
Wow.
He says he was known as a werewolf. Now I thought a werewolf was just mythical.
Yeah.
V'hu ben adam shamishtaneh leze'ev. It's a person who changes into a wolf. And when he does, he looks like a wolf. He's a man like a wolf. He's a werewolf. And the only one who could control him was his father. So Yehuda said to Yosef, you got to let Binyamin go back. And Yosef says, no, he has to do his job. Yeah, he stole. And Yehuda says, you don't know what you're talking about. This man is dangerous. If he changes into this werewolf, he will become violent, and only his father can control him. Then the Chidah continues from the Sefer HaYosher, he says. He says that when the coat was brought to Yaakov, all torn up, Yaakov said to the brothers, find me the first animal that's out there and bring him to me. What animal did he bring him? The wolf. And when he brings in the wolf, Yaakov says to the wolf, how dare you? Madua achaltem et Yosef beni? How come you attacked my son? How come you killed my boy? And Hashem made a miracle and he opened the mouth of the wolf. And the Chidah says it wasn't a wolf, it was a werewolf. It was a human being like a wolf, like Binyamin. And he says to him, I swear by God, I did not attack your son. I'm not from this neighborhood. I come from a distant land. And I'm here because someone took my son. And I'm looking for my son. And I changed into a wolf. I'm a werewolf. And I'm looking for my son.
Benjamin, his son?
Right, he doesn't say who his son is. But I didn't touch your son. I wouldn't. Because I know how it feels to lose a son. And Yaakov said to him, I believe you. And I give you a bracha that you should find your son. And he says, I give you a bracha, you should find your son. So the Chidah writes that when he gave the bracha to Binyamin, it was more than just a bracha, it was an identity of his personality. That Binyamin had this personality where he could transform between man and beast.
Wow.
Now that's shocking.
It's
shocking.
It afraid me.
It's shocking. And that's what the Chidah, that's what the Chidah writes. And I looked up, and the Chidah brings it down in his Sefer, the name of Rabbi Ephraim. Yes, sir.
So I did like Yehuda had to stick out for Binyamin. If Binyamin just could have turned to wolf and could have just run
He
away.
could have, but he didn't want that because they were afraid they might kill him.
It says in the bracha that Binyamin
Ze'ev Yitrof.
Ze'ev Yitro. So I heard one of the Rishon that we should rip the wolf off. That's the opposite of it. That's what it means.
That's what it means, right.
So he should rip the wolf off.
Rip off the wolf persona and just be a regular person.
Be right away. You should rip that wolf
Rip
away.
that wolf persona.
So
So, Binyamin.
Binyamin himself, how he should do it.
I don't know how he could do it. I don't know. I just don't know how he could do it.
But he never been changed to the werewolf, right?
Why I am afraid? Because you
He did. It seems that he did, and they knew this about him, and that's why Yaakov kept him home, wouldn't let him go anywhere. Kept him always home. Didn't want to let him go. Was afraid.
What's the connection between you said wolf and Yaakov asked him?
Yaakov asked the brothers to go out there and find the first animal you see. And when they found the wolf, they brought the wolf to him, and he spoke to the wolf. Why did you kill my son? And the wolf, Hashem opened his head and said, I didn't kill your son. You know, when the Chamor by Bilam spoke, it was a big miracle. Why wasn't this a big miracle? Because he was a person. He was a werewolf. Seems
Yaakov himself.
Yeah, it seems in Ashkenazi literature, many Meforshim talk about the werewolf. I would think it's a Sephardi thing. It was not. A lot of Ashkenazi literature talk about it. But the one who brings it down is Rabbi Ephraim, and the Chidah quotes it. And
Yeah.
the Chidah brings down the story.
My question was, what's the connection between the Binyamin became,
I don't know why.
and the Yaakov asking the wolf? Is there any connection?
No, it just happened to be a wolf.
His character training.
It just happened to be a wolf.
On Google,
Have a good night, everybody.